Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's episode of our podcast, the EU Spectator. As always, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Nick Zelewski, an expert in European politics and a familiar voice to our audience. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I apologize for the microphone issues on my laptop. That's what happens when it's almost a 7-year-old laptop, but hey, able to join on my phone. So, and as people, I think, need to realize too, especially family or friends, when we send them this link, they got to realize that for podcasts, we don't expect you to watch the whole time. I mean, these podcasts are just something you listen to in the background while you do housework. Maybe you're driving to work. You don't have to sit here the whole time and look at us. I mean, okay, if you want to glance at our face once in a while, but there's nothing exactly super exciting happening in this video stream. So pop in your earbuds and just go ahead and continue your business
Yeah,
as you listen to our rants.
and don't worry, you look perfect even on your iPhone. So, uh, in this edition, we turn our attention to the escalating Russian attacks directed against one of the EU's K and NATO's K allies, Poland. We will examine the nature of these threats, their implication for European security, and why not how Brussels and Warsaw are responding. So, in recent weeks, as you know, Nick, Poland has found itself at the center of two alarming incidents directly linked to Russians' increasingly aggressive posture. The first involved a series of drone incursions across the Polish border, reportedly launched from for Belarusian territory with Moscow's support. While no casualties were reported, the branch served as stark remain of Poland's vulnerability as both and NATO and EU a frontline state. Shortly afterwards, a cyber attack targeted Polish government networks and critical infrastructure, temporarily disrupting communication and firing concerns about coordinated hybrid warfare tactics designed to destabilize Warsaw. And then another drone flowed out over the presidential Belvedere Palace. This provocation takes place in the shadow of Zapad 2025 exercise, the large-scale Russian-Belarusian military exercises. Historically, Zapad has been more than just a drill. As you know, it has often functioned as both a show of strength and testing ground for Moscow's strategic intentions. And the scale of the upcoming exercise, coupled with the timing of the incidents in Poland, raises questions about whether Russian is signaling its readiness to expand hybrid operation or even conventional pressure against NATO eastern flank. So, to what extent do you see this incident as isolated provocations, and what extent as part of broader Russian strategy ahead of Zapad 2025?
I think, fortunately, as we could guess, is just that with looking at how much this invasion has not gone of Ukraine as Putin would have liked, Poland most likely doesn't have nowhere near the same threat level as Ukraine does, being invaded twice in less than a decade by Russia. But at the same time, it is concerning that Russia could send suicide drones into Poland, and Europe has a very muted response to it. And I keep on hearing chatters, oh, well, why hasn't Trump said anything? Why hasn't Trump? It's like, okay, but at the same time, too, we've heard the messaging from Europe the past several years. This is Europe's war. We don't need America as much as they want to think. And it's like, okay, then where's the strong response from European leaders to this? I mean, it's a bit bizarre how Russia sent suicide drones, which luckily, with the help of the Netherlands, Poland was able to shoot them down. As you mentioned, there were no casualties, but this is an outrageous violation of airspace, and the European Union should have had a much more forceful response, as it's had in the past, with looking at how, because of this invasion of Ukraine, the EU has passed 18 rounds of sanctions. There should have been a much stronger response from EU leadership regarding this, and now with the potential, and now looking at the disruption of communications, Poland having drones flown over its parliament building by Russia. This can't be taken lightly, and there needs to be a strong response. Yes, and I think part of the issue that people don't necessarily realize is that with the different political crises also back in the US, this isn't exactly the US's top priority. And when European leaders want to brush off Trump saying, oh, but this is Europe's war, this is Europe's war, his attitude almost is, okay, well, if it's Europe's war, you could handle it. Why
Mhm.
aren't you doing more to have an active role since you want to claim that you don't need the US, America could leave NATO, no big deal. And just honestly, the EU and the United States really do need to put their differences aside to send a stronger message, but that's going to take some effort on both part, and especially Europe doing more to arm itself. I mean, people have almost tried to make it seem as if Poland's silly to be spending 5% of its GDP on defense, which, by the way, is the new NATO goal, in case people don't realize that before it was 2%, now it's 5%, which makes sense considering there's an active war going on in Europe.
Mhm.
And there's no saying with how unpredictable Putin is whether he could do more to strike. I think he purposely, based off of my own experience though, because I've been to Rzeszów, Poland myself multiple times, I think this was a choice he did on purpose because, for anyone who doesn't know, Rzeszów Airport, where the airspace was closed temporarily since it's so close to the Ukrainian border, and that's where it was near the attacks. For people who don't realize, it's a well-known, Putin has to know this himself, that Rzeszów Airport is well protected with military equipment where they have weapons to defend and attack if they must in order to protect the eastern border of Poland. I
Mhm.
feel that Putin chose this as a target just to almost test the waters to see what he could get away, but also because he knew that there would be no major consequences, that there wouldn't be casualties because of what a great defense Poland has for its eastern border. It's just that at the same time, the EU has to come with a much forceful response. I possibly even going as far as saying, okay, every single Russian citizen, you're being deported back to Russia. You will not be allowed as long as your government continues this. Maybe that could help motivate these Russians to finally get after Putin and have
Mhm.
much more large scale protests that they need. Because as much as people try to make it seem that, oh, maybe Ukraine should make concessions, look at Russia. Russia's losing a lot of soldiers itself. It's losing a lot of economic power because it's cutting itself off from the wealthiest nations in the world, uh, being isolated from Europe. And at what cost? in the past year, they maybe gained a few kilometers of Ukrainian territory. That's it. That's what you're going to lose all these soldiers for. You're going to have soldiers coming back from a war zone scarred and trying to reintegrate back into society essentially for nothing. This is going to have widespread consequences for Russia that I don't think Putin really thought through. And at the same time, but at the same time, Putin's also dangerous, as you could imagine, where it seems that he doesn't want to admit he's wrong. So he doesn't want to pull out of this war so quickly and so easily. But at the same time, what does he really think he's going to accomplish with Belarus? With Belarus just having such a small population itself, it's not like Belarus adds that much manpower to his efforts.
Yeah,
The
right.
only thing, the only thing that we can hope for too, because it's already a known fact that North Korea finally runs out of ammunition that it can no longer send to Russia, because that's also part of the issue, is that you have this nutcase communist nation that has destroyed its own country, impoverishes its own people for decades on end. It's just mass suffering because they spend all this money on the military and propaganda to try to make the nation seem stronger than it is, which unfortunately, because it's Russia's ally, they've been sending all these weapons to Russia. So as Russia is running out of maybe its own ammo, it's getting more weapons from North Korea. So we can only hope that after a while, these two nations run out of it, because even if they dedicate a larger percentage of their economy
Mhm.
to these weapons in order to try to make themselves seem like these great superpowers, which they really aren't.
Yeah, but
Look,
I'd like to hear your opinion about the consequences of this special relation, political and economic one between North Korea and the Russian Federations. What are the consequences for the entire international relation system?
well, the bad thing is both leaders have massive egos. They don't want to admit that they're ever wrong. So the bad thing is they will always be a threat
Yeah,
to the
but
rest of the world, because they've created such a dependence amongst each other. They're so stubborn that they will never admit they're wrong, which, even though if they would, it would open themselves up more to having economic relations with the rest of the world, normalizing things, improving conditions for their citizens. But we see with North Korea, it is such an extremist nation that instead of admitting that their system of governance is wrong, they'd rather have their own citizens eating tree bark and do everything they can to keep out influences from the West, closing its border to make sure nobody could ever escape, and that no information could be leaked into the nation. The extreme measures and the expenditure to do that, rather than admit you're wrong, these are two dangerous ones. But luckily, their power is waning, because as the rest of the world develops economically, it's
okay.
going to make it harder and harder for these two to try to remain a threat as they think they are, because their economies have been stagnating for years, while even as other nations spend less of their economy on defense, because of how much wealthier they are, they're outspending these two by a significant margin.
But
And there's also questions about the quality of their weapons, anyways, where they can put all the propaganda they want, they can put on these military parades, but we're seeing the failings of the Russian government now with and it doesn't have the capacity to take over Ukraine, so it's not as strong as a military power as it would like to convey this image.
but it's using is China using this special relation in its own benefit?
In a way, yes, where it doesn't really need to get involved, where it's also to its benefit because once there's chaos going on in the world between with these two and Ukraine, it shields China a little from negative attention because not sure how much you've watched China recently, but as people have made a comment that they're showing significant cracks in the Chinese economy because of Trump's tariffs.
Okay.
People want to pretend that they're not working, but they do seem to be. The economy seems to be getting much worse for China, with factories closing, people desperately trying to sell off machinery.
Hmm.
This But obviously, a war is going to take precedence in media coverage. So it shields China from negative attention, where it gives China a little time to almost try to regroup and try to plow ahead with this goal of trying to be a global superpower that it would like to be, but we know that's really not the case yet. We've seen that with the fact that different Silk Road projects have fallen through. Uh, it tries to do these grandiose projects and then it doesn't do it to the quality that it should. So it's not as successful as it would like to show through. You know, if people pay attention to the Chinese propaganda, they would realize that so many buildings in China are built so poorly that they usually take videos at night because they have cheap neon lights that make, wow, look at how futuristic it looks. And then people show pictures of the same areas during the day, and you see buildings where they were built 10 years ago and the facade's falling off
Hmm.
because of what poor construction. That's not a superpower if one they're doing these things, but it shields, and it, it also allows China, unfortunately, to take over Hong Kong successfully, as it's been doing, taking away the freedoms that Hong Kong was supposed to have
Hmm.
as more of an independent part of China for several decades after it gained its independence from the United Kingdom, which unfortunately isn't the case. Uh, The only bright side is that we haven't seen an all-out attack yet on Taiwan, which this could almost be, as international experts have warned, this could be a perfect time for China to do so, which luckily we haven't seen yet. But no, China definitely uses it to its advantage because it also becomes a bit less of a burden on China to help prop up the North Korean state because Russia's currently focused on propping them up since it's getting weapons in return and even having North Korean soldiers fighting on the front line in Ukraine.
Yeah, and we
Where,
both know. Yeah, and we both know that China is trying to become the next superpower involved in a peace negotiation in Ukraine. But returning to our main topic, we know that for policymakers in Brussels and Warsaw, the challenge it's not only to interpret the threats correctly, but also to forge a coherent response that demonstrates deterrence without risking escalation. And as Poland strengthens its defense posture, the EU is once again confronted with the delicate balance between solidarity, resilience, and the specter of confrontation with the Russian Federation. So, in your opinion, how should the EU balance its support for Poland with the need to avoid direct escalation with the Russian Federation?
honestly, it just needs to word itself carefully, but Brussels really should have come out immediately almost saying, okay, Russia, we understand that this was a mistake of yours because if it happens again, this is our red line in order to strike back. where Brussels doesn't need to declare war automatically on Russia, but just set a red line and be like, okay, we're going to consider this a mistake, but it will not happen again, or there will be consequences. And the bad thing is, we're not seeing that happening from Brussels. I mean, I understand that people are making comments saying they're concerned about whether Article 5 would be triggered of NATO, which, for those who don't know, that would be mobilization of NATO troops in order to protect a member state that's under direct threat, which would, in this case, obviously be Poland, who would need to be defended. But that doesn't need to go as far. It's just that Brussels should have come out clear and say, hey, we have Poland's back. They're our member state. So, Russia, you have to be careful. We're not going to tolerate another excursion into airspace. And because there wasn't that response, you then see Russian drones over Poland's parliament building. I mean, this is when Europe needs to also step up, especially if it wants to say this is its war, it's capable going alone and not needing to rely on the US. Well, where the hell was the strong response that should have come out of Brussels immediately? I mean, we constantly see these strongly worded messages from von der Leyen every time that there's another round of sanctions passed on Russia. But then with this, it just seems to the no, you just hear mumblings about it, and there's no strong statements as you should have seen from other member states. I mean, it is great though that we did see the Netherlands working with Poland, because this does send a strong signal to Russia that Poland's not going to be left alone. You already had Russia, you had already had the Netherlands assisting with shooting down these suicide drones, where even though Poland probably could have done it alone, still it was that was needed to show that at least two member states are doing it together to show no, this will not be tolerated. Russia cannot. I think that it's just going to be able to fight a new front in Poland, and that no one will respond. That won't be the case. That Russia will be face a lot of pushback from other nations in Europe. So that was great with the Netherlands. It's just that we should have seen more actions or speeches from other European leaders instead of just hearing grumblings, trying to then spike the ball back in the US's court when Europe wants to try to make itself seem as an independent superpower, not reliant on US military systems. But then when it comes to this, except for having the Netherlands and Poland working together, it was such a muted response from the rest of Europe, which is pretty disgusting, especially when these leaders have shown multiple times before that they have no issue insulting Putin, insulting and talking publicly negatively about Putin's invasion of Ukraine. There should have been even more outrage with this regarding to an actual attack on an EU member state. And it's just unacceptable how there wasn't this strong response.
Yeah, and of course, we should understand that we can succeed without the US involved. And in my opinion, the United States remains a central pillar of security for Europe, and recent events have only reinforced the importance of Washington's commitment to the European allies. And Poland, perhaps more than any other EU member, has consistently underlined the value of the transatlantic bond, investing heavily in its own defense and hosting significant American military deployments. And from troops rotation to air defense system, the US presence on Polish soil is both symbolic and operational, sending a clear signal to the Russian Federation that any attack on on Poland. It's an attack on NATO as a whole. So, how credible do you believe U.S. Security commitments remains in the current political climate, particularly with Poland on the front line?
No, without a doubt, there is a commitment that the U.S. wouldn't leave
I'm
Poland
asking
alone.
you, yeah, I'm asking you this because we have so many voices that are trying to convince us that the US and President Trump will make a step back from its commitments.
No, I know. I definitely heard the same, but no, without a doubt, especially for members, that would never happen, especially when you have member states like Poland, where Poland even outspends the US in a relation to percent of its GDP, where Poland's the number one uh, member state of NATO for its military spending. It's
Mhm.
not going to be abandoned by Trump. Uh, I just think that because with Russia, it's a bit more delicate, the fact that they do have nuclear weapons. I mean, we're not going to see an outright preeminent strike on Russia just to show a sign of force. And I also think that we do have to not realize that Europe's military strength is a lot stronger than people necessarily think. Where, yes, without a doubt, the transatlantic partnership is ironclad, where without a doubt, it makes Russia inferior to the EU, to NATO member states and the US. But not only that, but with how much Russia has lost of its military capacity fighting this war in Ukraine, it makes Europe seem that much stronger because, as you know, the EU was founded for peace in Europe. So even though you've had member states continuously investing in their military, keep on buying weapons, developing weapons, they're not using it against each other. You have France and Germany, they'll scream at each other a little in European Parliament. They're not bombing each other. So all this military capacity just keeps on getting tented off for the case of an actual strike on Europe,
Mhm.
which it's unused. While Russia, the fact that it's using nuclear, not nuclear, the fact that Russia is using North Korean weapons signifies that it looks like it's running out of its own stockpiles. So it's not going to be able to fight this massive war against the EU. Just even looking at the EU in NATO members in Europe, looking at their military capacity alone, it's laughable to think that Russia thinks it's going to get very far.
Okay.
But no, it's definitely. I do agree that it is a bit more important to hear this directly from Trump and from the U.S. government itself in a stronger way. But without a doubt, Poland's not going to be abandoned, as some people may uh, say.
Mhm.
And I just guess my criticism too for some of these individuals saying this. Okay, and also where are they putting the pressure on Brussels to have a stronger vocal response as they should have? I agree. Washington lost the ball on this a little, but so did Brussels, and there needs to be a bit of regrouping. Although, it's hard to say because maybe there was a reason for having a muted response too, where Brussels and Washington might just be talking behind the scenes. You and I, obviously, without that security clearance, where we don't know, where they're preparing a response behind the scenes, and we just have to wait to see. Especially because, as we've been, just to reiterate, as we've been discussing, with the military strength alone in Europe, and then when you add in the U.S. Russia wouldn't dare to start a front attacking a NATO member state, especially looking at how much it's floundered in Ukraine.
But
It would stretch itself way too thin, and that would most likely, and Putin would realize that would trigger the collapse of Russia as he knows it, where he does not have the capacity to start an all-out war in any NATO member state. That would be the end of his government.
Yeah, but given Poland's role as a frontline state and given its transatlantic special relation, because you mentioned that, what lessons can the rest of eastern flank draw from these events in terms of hybrid defense and resilience and of course in terms of transatlantic relations?
I think maybe if they're not happy with the response, maybe they should push a little more to have these private conversations with Washington. But at the same time, to give the Eastern flank credit, as you know yourself, they are the top spenders in NATO. So they keep on becoming much wealthier nations with being the fastest growing economies in the EU. They are essentially the model nations in NATO where they're doing everything they need to keep on making sure that they properly defend themselves because as you know, these nations, whether they were directly included in the Soviet Union or if they were just associate nations, they know the consequences of being under too close to Russia, where they're not going to allow themselves to for that to happen. So they really shouldn't be too concerned with the fact of how much we're seeing themselves investing in their defense, being prepared. Just that maybe push to have those private conversations, not only with Washington but also with Brussels to say, hey, we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves, but we also need a stronger response. Uh, on our behalf as well, especially when they've been such model NATO member states and drawing this clear line.
So thank you very much, Nick. That brings us to the end of today's episode of the EU Spectator. We have looked closely at the recent incidents in Poland and the role of the United States in safeguarding European security. And in my opinion, these issues highlight once again how fragile the balance has become on NATO's eastern flank, and how vital it's for Europe and its allies to remain both vigilant and united. Thank you once again, as always, for sharing your expertise and perspective, and thank you to all of our friends for listening and engaging with us. If you found today's discussion insightful, please make sure to follow the EU Spectator for future episodes, and we'll continue to bring you clear analysis and thoughtful debate on the challenges shaping Europe's political landscape. Stay with us, stay informed, and we will see you next time. Thank you once again, Nick.
Thank you.